India Legal, stories that count.
Hello and welcome to another special readout from India Legal. As you know, we are the nation's first independent political legal weekly covering controversial issues of national and international importance. In an earlier readcast, we had analyzed the issue of war crimes. This was based on an analysis by one of India's most highly regarded jurists, Justice Kamaljeet Garewal, who once sat in the Punjab and Haryana High Court. It was in the context of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which some readers of Indian mythology also liken to Ravan, the king of the Rakshas king of Sri Lanka, looking for his brother Vibhishan during the war against Ram, Vibhishan having deserted the kingdom. As this brutal war rages on and the death and destruction multiply, we return to this subject. This time it is written by seasoned journalist Dilip Bob, who is currently our managing editor. As Russian atrocities against Ukraine build, so do the calls to bring the perpetrators to justice amid increasing signs of what is classified as war crimes under the Geneva Convention. Now, the International Criminal Court, ICC, is already in Ukraine to gather and verify evidence, signaling a strong push to bring Putin and his associates to trial. What are the possibilities? Dilip Bob, or Bob Saab, as he is universally known, writes that the crimes are piling up. Investigators and journalists have found what appears to be evidence of deliberate killing of civilians in Bucha, a town on the outskirts of Kiev and other nearby areas. This is a readout from his latest compelling report. Ukrainian forces, Bob writes, say they have found mass graves and there's evidence of civilians having been shot dead after their feet and hands were bound. There was also the bombing of a maternity hospital. The word children was written in giant letters outside the building. In addition, there have been Russian strikes on a theater in Mariupol, which led to mass deaths. The latest is the bombing of a train station where hundreds of men, women and children were gathered to leave for safer areas. US President Joe Biden and Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson have both said that Vladimir Putin should be tried for war crimes. This can be an actual have a war crimes trial, Biden said after horrific images of killings in Bucha appeared online. Johnson said much the same after he paid a visit to Kiev and toured with the city with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. In March, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Russia had destroyed apartment buildings, schools, hospitals, critical infrastructure, civilian vehicles, shopping centers, and ambulances. The actions that the US said amounted to war crimes. Investigators from the International Criminal Court, ICC, are already working in Ukraine to gather and verify evidence. And a number of nations have already referred the case to the global court, signaling a strong push to bring such crimes to trial. Ukraine has also set up a team to gather evidence. Today, the International Criminal Court, ICC, and the International Court of Justice, ICJ, have roles upholding the rules of war. The International Court of Justice, ICJ, rules on disputes between states, but cannot prosecute individuals. If the ICJ ruled against Russia, the UN Security Council, UNSC, would be responsible for enforcing that. Russia is one of the Council's 5 permanent members and could veto any proposal against it. There are also practical and political limits to what the ICC can do in any of the crimes it investigates and prosecutes. Among those challenges is the fact that neither Russia nor Ukraine is a party to the ICC. Ukraine, however, does recognize the court's jurisdiction, which means the ICC can prosecute those responsible for atrocities committed in Ukraine. The ICC's basic remit is to try war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity, collectively known as atrocity crimes. The ICC is the only legal mechanism for holding the Kremlin to account. The ICC's chief prosecutor, British lawyer Karim Khan, QC, Queen's Counsel, says there is a reasonable basis to believe war crimes have been carried out in Ukraine. But it seems unlikely that Putin or any of his high-level associates would ever stand trial. Firstly, investigators have to consider what constitutes a war crime. These are contained in treaties called the Geneva Conventions. Under the treaty, civilians cannot be deliberately attacked, nor can the infrastructure that is vital to their survival. Serious offenses such as murder, rape, or mass persecution of a group are known as crimes against humanity. Then there is genocide, identified in international law as deliberate killing of people from a particular national, ethnic, racial, or religious group with the intention of destroying the group, whether entirely or in part. That's a direct quote. Genocide is a specific war crime that is considered far more serious than the illegal killing of civilians. The law requires proof of the intent to commit genocide. The law is clear. It is a crime to intentionally target civilians, says Karim Khan. He said this to CNN's Anderson Cooper. He, however, said that a burden of proof must be established and a judicial process must play out. The ICC is the only body that can play that role. It was established in 1998 after what is called the Rome Statute, named after the UN's Rome Conference, where 160 different governments convened to consider an international criminal court as a first permanent international court. The ICC came into force only in 2002. The ICC is based in The Hague and has its own judicial staff, but operates in coordination with the United Nations, even though it is considered an independent body. The court has 18 judges serving 9-year terms. The ICC is the modern successor to Nuremberg, which you may remember prosecuted key Nazi leaders in 1945. The prosecution process itself is quite intricate. If there is enough evidence of war crimes and mass civilian killings, the prosecutor will ask ICC judges to issue arrest warrants to bring individuals to trial in The Hague. That is where the catch-22 lies. The court doesn't have its own police force, so relies on individual states to arrest suspects. Now, Russia is not a member of the court. It pulled out in 2016, and neither will Putin extradite anyone in Russia charged with atrocities. In theory, the UN Security Council could ask the ICC to investigate this offense. But again, Russia could veto this. In fact, Russia continues to deny any atrocities, instead claiming the mass killings and deaths are faked by Ukraine, and insists that not a single civilian has faced any violent action by the Russian military. The huge number of apartment buildings destroyed, says Russia, also housed legitimate military targets. However, what can undermine that claim are the efforts by the NGOs, the Ukrainian government, and global independent media houses that can document evidence of the killings and rapes via photos, interviews, and documentation. The US, China, Russia, Ukraine, and incidentally India are not members of the court, which has often been criticized for focusing too heavily on Africa and applying selective justice, quote unquote. Now, with the destruction of civilian targets in Ukraine and the undeniable evidence of mass killings in areas once occupied by Russian soldiers, the ICC says, that's what Khan says, will issue arrest warrants if prosecutors can show reasonable grounds to believe war crimes were committed. America, not being a member of the ICC, is also diplomatically embarrassing and is already prompting accusations of quote-unquote Western hypocrisy. Another option might be a special tribunal organized by a group of countries. After all, the Nuremberg Tribunal was, for instance, was established by the US, Britain, France and the Soviet Union to prosecute Nazi leaders after World War II. Similar tribunals were set up to prosecute war crimes committed during the Balkan Wars in the early 1990s and during Rwanda genocide in 1984. There was also a UN-backed special court for Sierra Leone, established in 2002 to prosecute those responsible for atrocities perpetrated during the country's civil war in 1996. The International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia indicted its first head of state, the then Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic, in 1999 and took him into custody in 2001. His trial, Milosevic's trial, began in 2002 and was underway when he died at The Hague in 2006. Charles Taylor, the former president of Liberia, was found guilty of aiding and abetting war crimes and crimes against humanity after 4 years of hearings at the Special Court for Sierra Leone. Similarly, there was the extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia, which prosecuted the crimes of the Khmer Rouge under the UN umbrella. Unlike international courts like the European Court of Human Rights, the ICC can only try individuals, not nation states. That theoretically includes sitting heads of state, although that's never happened in the court's history and is unlikely to happen in the context of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And the court has no enforcement mechanism. So while it can issue arrest warrants, it relies on national authorities to execute those warrants. The court tries people, not countries, and focuses on those who hold the most responsibility. Putin could, therefore, theoretically be indicted by the court for previously ordering war crimes in Crimea. However, the ICC does not conduct trials in absentia, so he would either have to be handed over by Russia or arrested outside of Russia. Both options are beyond the bounds of possibility. Court proceedings can be brought in one of two ways: either a national government or the UN Security Council, where Russia holds veto power, can refer cases for investigation. The current ICC position is based on requests by 39 national governments, a majority of them European. As Khan told CNN, "I want to emphasize that I'm willing to speak to all sides, and not just the Ukrainian side, but also the Russian Federation, state parties and non-state parties alike. This institution is not political. We are not part of the geostrategic or geopolitical divisions that we witness around the world." That's a quote from Khan. Now here's the bad news. If the wheels of justice grind exceedingly slow, international justice barely moves at all. Investigations at the ICC take many years. Only a handful of convictions have been won. Now the pandemic has slowed down the judicial process even more. The ICC also depends on donations by member countries for its existence, and a genuine lack of resources has further crippled the court. The ICC has four principal organs: the presidency, the judicial divisions, the office of prosecutor, and the registry. The president is the senior most judge chosen by his or her peers in the judicial division, which is composed of 18 judges and hears cases before the court. The office of the prosecutor is headed by the prosecutor, who investigates crimes and initiates criminal proceedings before judicial division. The registry is headed by the registrar and is charged with managing the administrative functions of the ICC, including the headquarters detention unit and the public defense office. The ICC employs over 900 personnel from roughly 100 countries and conducts proceedings in English and French. The ICC held its first hearings in 2006 concerning war crimes against Thomas Lubanga Diallo, a Congolese warlord accused of recruiting child soldiers. his subsequent conviction in 2012 was a first in the court's history. The Office of the Prosecutor has opened 12 official investigations and is conducting an additional 9 preliminary examinations. A total of 46 individuals have been indicted in the ICC, including Ugandan rebel leader Joseph Kony, former President Omar al-Bashir of Sudan, President Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya, the late Libyan head of state Muammar Gaddafi, President Laurent Gbagbo of the Ivory Coast, and former Vice President Jean-Pierre Bemba of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Linking Putin to other reported war crimes in Ukraine, like the indiscriminate killing of non-combatants, targeting civilian facilities like train stations and hospitals, and sexual violence, is a massive undertaking and requires documentary evidence, like specific orders or testimony from insider witnesses, which link actions of soldiers on the ground to officials in the Kremlin. Taking it to the ICC and then bringing Putin or his generals and associates to trial is still an impossible dream. Bob Saab, Dilip Bob, then examines the role and positions of India in this scenario. He observes that India has neither signed nor ratified the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. It actively participated in the preparatory committee for the establishment of the International Criminal Court and the United Nations Diplomatic Conference of Plenipotentiaries on the establishment of an International Criminal Court, the Rome Conference, that is. India, writes Bob, was however in favor of an ICC which could not have jurisdiction over acts committed on Indian territory or by its subjects, except for exceptional scenarios. These exceptional scenarios, according to the Indian government, consisted of situations where the state machinery had collapsed, that is, where the state's administrative and legal machinery had ceased to function. Additionally, India wanted to include in the statute crimes related to terrorism. India only has a representative on the ICJ, which comes directly under the UN and offers advisory opinions on international legal issues. The ICJ is the only international court that adjudicates general disputes between countries, with its rulings and opinions serving as primary sources of international law. The Indian representative is Dalveer Bhandari, whose term ends in 2027. The most recent case in the ICJ involving India was that of Kulbhushan Jadhav, arrested by Pakistan on spying charges and decreed to be hanged by a Pakistan military court. The ICJ began proceedings in The Hague in 2017 to review the case. India and Pakistan both sent their legal teams to put forward their arguments, led by Harish Salve and Khawar Qureshi, respectively. On May 18, 2017, the International Court of Justice stayed the hanging of Jadhav after India moved the ICJ, which, after deliberation, stayed the execution of the sentence passed by a Pakistani military court. The ICJ was also found a violation of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations by Pakistan, and directed Pakistan to provide consular access to Kulbhushan Jadhav in that July 2019 verdict. Well, that's an encyclopedia of legal and political information and historical perspective collected by one of India's most savvy journalists. I certainly have learned a lot. I hope you did too. That's all for now. This is Inderjit Badhwar. Until next time, goodbye.
India Legal, stories that count.